Hello everybody, I'm Storyman Mark and it's story time.
So here I am at the North Park Village Nature Center. Let's take a quick look inside. Here's the classroom building. It's closed right now because of the coronavirus. It's also got the fireplace where I get to tell stories since 1996. Wow. So, I got a poem for you. It's written by Joyce Kilmer in 1912. It goes like this. I think that I shall never see a poem lovely as a tree whose hungry mouth is pressed upon the earth's sweet flowing breast. A tree that looks at our mother all day and lifts her leafy arms to hooray. A tree that may in summer wear a nest of robins in her hair, upon whose bosom snow has lain, who lives intimately with the rain. Poems are made for fools like me, but only Mother Nature, whoa, only Mother Nature. Only Mother Nature can make a beep bop doo doo wop beep bop a tree. Yeah. Now get out there and hug a tree, will you? That Tree poem by Joyce Kilmer. Now we're going to head through the gate and into the park center itself. We're entering an oak savanna area that's been rehabbed, and here is my favorite oak tree here. Look at how the branches spread out. It's wonderful. And it has the characteristic silhouette.
It's time now for joke time on Storytime. Go ahead, make me laugh.
Where do saplings go to learn? Elementary school. What's the best way to make a tree laugh? Tell it a corny joke. Why did the chestnut tree feel left out? It never got in on the oak.
Well, that's all the time we have for Storytime. Thanks for the yucks.
So here I am at the wetland area. And this particular spot is my favorite place to tell Turtle's Race with Beaver that I told in our first episode of Storytime. So this is Old Groovy's resting place. You can see all of the stumps around where we put them around and make a place for people to sit, for me to tell stories. Well, welcome to the Storytelling Tree's resting place. The story I want to tell you today is The Face in the Tree, and it speaks to what happened to Old Groovy. I called the Storytelling Tree Old Groovy. And when I first arrived here back in 1996, Old Groovy was a tall, proud tree, kind of twisted a little bit. And I asked about why he was all twisted, and one of the scientists said that he had maybe some fungus underneath his bark, and he was trying to work around it and trying to defeat it. But you know, I tell stories in this area and around campfires, and one night, a couple years after I started telling stories here, I was getting ready to put the campfire out. Everybody had left, and I heard this voice from just beyond the light. And I said, "Who's that?" "Psst, we want to tell you a story." "Who's that?" I said, "Who's that?" Well, it happened to be some of the animals. I didn't know, but the animals used to sit around, they still do as far as I know, sit around outside of the firelight and listen to the stories I tell. Well, they had a story they wanted to tell me, and this is the story I'm going to tell you. You see, way back, many, many years ago, back in the late 1600s, a strange two-legged creature moved into the neighborhood. He had kind of pale skin, and he immediately cut down a few trees and made himself a place to live, a little hut. And he was a trapper from over the big water. And he'd come here to trap all the animals that he could and sell their furs and their pelts to earn a living. And that's what he started to do. He laid out his traps and he started trapping the animals. Well, the animals started to disappear. All their friends were disappearing, and they began to become afraid that they would all be wiped out. So they had a powwow. They all gathered together to talk about what could possibly be done about this strange two-legged creature who'd moved in and had no respect for them at all, unlike the other two-legged creatures, the Native Americans who lived here, who had respect for them. So as they were talking, they decided that they were going to try to do something to help get rid of this guy. And the bears had an idea. They thought, well, you know, we're big and strong. We could make a bow and arrow and maybe pull it back and get rid of him that way. But the more they discussed it and the more they realized that whoever was going to shoot the arrow on the bow would have to pull his claws out. And if he pulled his claws out, he wouldn't be able to survive. And you know, bears use their claws. They use them to climb trees. They use them to pull trunks apart so they can get to the insects, and especially honey. Honey, they like that honey that the bees might have inside that tree trunk. So they talked a little more, and Awi Ushti Little Dare and Old Groovy, the tree, who was a young tree back then, but he was an older tree now, a couple hundred years old by the time I met him back in 1996. And he decided that he would help. And so they hatched a plan where Awi Ushti Little Deer would entice the trapper to follow him into the woods and stop right by Old Groovy. And if they could, they'd get him to lean up against Old Groovy's trunk. And that's what they did. They decided to do that. So one day, it was a bright summer day, the hunter trapsman woke up one morning and he came out, and what does he see but Awi Ushti Little Deer standing right there, just eating some vegetation, you know, having a little bit of breakfast. Oh, he couldn't believe it. Here was a deer right there in front of his own hut. So he ran inside, got his old flintlock rifle, and came out and took aim, but Awi Ushti had moved on down out of range. And so the hunter began to track him because he could follow Awi Ushti's footprints. And he followed him, maybe it was a mile or so from here, but he followed him all the way along until finally they came right past Old Groovy, and Awi Ushti just stood right over there a little bit. That hunter moved in close very quietly, trying to sneak up on Little Deer. The Little Deer knew he was there, and just when he was going to take aim right near Old Groovy, the forest erupted. The birds started twittering and screaming, and so did all of the animals. The bears were screaming, the deers were screaming, everybody was screaming, and out of fear, the hunter leaned back against Old Groovy and put his arms up and tried to shoo the birds away who were dive bombing him. Now once the hunter backed up against Old Groovy split his trunk and opened it. And into the trunk fell the trapper, and Old Groovy hugged that hunter and just held him inside, and that hunter was trying to get out, and that hate and that ugliness that the hunter had inside of him caused Old Groovy to start to twist from that day on, and until I met him back in 1996, and he was all twisted. And well, finally, about 10-15 years later, a huge windstorm, a huge summer windstorm came through here. There was hail and thunder, and the rains were going sideways, and the winds were 65, 90 miles an hour, something like that, and it was a huge burst. And Old Groovy couldn't take it anymore. He fell to the ground. But from that day to this day, the animals here had their home okay for a little while anyway, until some of those other two-legged creatures from across the big pond came and started to shape this land the way they wanted. And now, of course, the Nature Center is a beautiful place for those animals to live again. And so when Old Groovy fell, He fell and he did what trees do when they fall. They become food for insects, and eventually, it took a couple years, but finally, old Groovy has disappeared now back into the earth. So when you're out in the woods walking around, you might notice a face in the tree. Take the time to look and see. If you see a face in the tree, maybe you'll understand how it got there. Maybe that hunter or woodsman or person didn't have respect for the forest. So remember, when you go into the woods, whatever you take in, take out. Leave only your footprints, because you don't want to become another face in the tree.
That's all we have time for today. Thanks for watching. This is Storyman Mark wishing you all a wonderful rest of your day. May all your stories be happy ones. Tune in again next time for another episode of Storytime. Bye-bye. Oh yeah, don't forget to wash them.